Hello, and welcome to the Three Questions podcast, where we dive deep into the world of wealth management and connect you with industry experts. I'm your host, Wayne Baxter, Senior Executive Manager at One Capital Management. Are you or someone close to you a parent of a child with disabilities? If so, you are definitely not going to want to miss today's episode. We're going to address the three questions to ask about Social Security insurance and Social Security disability insurance. Thank you for taking time to check us out. And if you enjoy this episode of the Three Questions podcast, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our podcast and YouTube channels. While some knowledge exists, most people still do not have an understanding and knowledge that allows them to integrate public and private benefits into a package that best suits each individual's needs. On today's episode of the podcast, we're going to explore the complexities of the private and public benefits world, and we're going to do that by addressing the three questions you should ask before applying for Social Security insurance and Social Security disability insurance. Joining me from Long Beach, California is Daniel Fortuno. He is the president and CEO of Benefits Education Center, or in short, BEC. BEC assists in coordinating a full package of benefits that include health coverage, government benefits, and fiscal planning for people living with disabilities. Daniel, great to see you. It's something I've been really wanting to do for a while to get you on the podcast. So thank you for making yourself available today.
Thank you. I look forward to this.
Yeah, for sure. We got a lot to cover, for sure. Before we get to our three questions, I think a great place to start for our audience, and remember, is really education in terms of maybe you could just share the role that BEC plays, and who are you coaching, and how far abroad are your coaching services available? And what does your coaching services actually provide? So just a big overview, if you could, just to get everybody up to speed.
Okay, so Benefits Education Center, we're based in Long Beach, California. I do benefits coaching pretty much throughout the country for individuals and or with families who have disabled adult children with disabilities. Our main focus are individuals with any type of either physical and or mental health disability that are looking to access public or private benefits. I've even assisted individuals who are, like pilots and other professionals access private benefits such as long-term disability and short-term disability. And even in the universe where it was much more difficult in the past to access private health insurance issues, which currently it's not, but we don't know what's going to happen. But that is an area where, we'll see if that again becomes an area that we have to find creative ways to provide health coverage for people with pre-existing conditions. But I do work in California, and I have knowledge of specifically 14 states. And it takes about a half hour to 45 minutes to work up a new state because there are national programs and then there are specific state programs. As an example, Medicaid, which is a form of health coverage, which in California we call Medi-Cal. It's a national program, but every state has a way that they administrate it. Another example is there are 7 states that offer state disability insurance. So those are the specific type things that you look into when you're working in a state outside of California.
I just saw this when you were talking about the areas that you cover, but does that also include substance abuse? Will that also be?
Substance abuse, I've been around long enough to where I remember back in the day where substance abuse was a condition where people would qualify for benefits because of it. And then I remember when there came a position where, as an example, Social Security was making it where if an individual has substance abuse as a primary issue, they weren't granting benefits because they were making the assumption if if the individual dealt with the substance abuse with treatment and stopped using the substance, then the issue would go away. Then we had to start proving that what was behind the substance abuse. Was there a mental health issue? Then if we're able to prove the mental health issue, then and we were able to say that that's the reason why there was a substance abuse, then that's how those cases you get those granted so that the substance abuse is not a problem anymore.
Right. So in other words, it was not it was the it was considered it wasn't the cause of the it wasn't the substance itself wasn't the cause, it was the underlying illness, in other words.
Right, because Social Security is an example. If there's a way to resolve a disability and there's a way to create a solution or a resolution, such as a medication or the stop doing a behavior,
Mhm.
then it is not, they don't consider it to be a disabling condition. That's why oftentimes I tell people, if you're doing a medication that's resolving the issue, then there's no disability. But if you're doing a medication, but there are still issues that are going on, how do those issues impact your life?
Right.
And that's what's being looked for.
I was thinking about, quite frankly, just at the top level, I was thinking primarily about the fentanyl issue that we're having in the country, and I was just curious if that somehow, if there was an intersection there, but I would suppose it would fall under the category of abstinence could potentially reverse any of the issues that were being caused. So,
Yeah, if somebody were to stop the fentanyl use, would that stop all the conditions, or are they using fentanyl to mask or deal with a particular mental health issue? And if you're able to tickle out the mental health issue, then they're not going to look at abstinence as a way to resolve the issue.
well, like I said, I'm really glad you joined us today. The first time we met, Daniel was actually a speaker at a Provisors Affinity Group meeting that I had attended recently, and he did a presentation. I'm telling you, it was excellent, and the audience really appreciated the material you covered, and there was so much. And I didn't delay at all. I immediately reached out to Daniel and asked him if he could possibly join us, and we've been wanting to do this for quite a while. So really happy that you're here today, Daniel. Uh, so why don't we get right to our questions? No reason to delay. We're going to be discussing the three questions you should ask before applying for Social Security insurance and Social Security disability insurance. Let's dive right in, Daniel. Let's get right to question number one. And question number one is, how difficult is it to qualify for Social Security insurance and Social Security disability benefits?
Okay, so let me clarify something in the way that you're describing the two programs.
Okay.
Um, when we say Social Security, um, when it comes to the benefits that are based on disability, the two programs are supplemental security income and Social Security disability insurance.
Okay.
So they both have the same definition of disability. And the simplified version is that an individual is unable to work for at least a year or more based on meeting the definition of disability. And it is not a physician statement. It is not a physician saying you're disabled. It's not a physician saying you're totally disabled or permanently disabled or filling out a particular form, unlike an individual could have done for a private benefit like short-term or long-term disability, or a benefit like a short-term disability that the state of California or another state may provide. Social Security requires a review of a medical record. And the medical record, the biggest challenge people have is people are often what I call, and I use a lot of terminology or ways of describing things so that it's a little bit easier for people to understand. I call it being diagnosed based. Social Security is not diagnosed based. They don't look at a bunch of diagnoses and say, oh, you have this diagnosis and you qualify. You can have two people can have the same diagnosis, and one person's considered disabled and the other one is not. What
Hmm.
they're looking at is the diagnosis, if they're looking at that. And the key thing is, how does the medical and or psychological record actually capture the limitations of that individual? How does that diagnosis, the term I use is manifest itself? What are the limitations that impact that individual from the minute they wake up to the minute they go to bed? How does it impact them day to day? And then Social Security looks at it and says, oh, we see how it impacts them. We don't believe they're able to work. See, people think that the doctor is going to say, I have X diagnosis, and because of that, the doctor says the person can't work. Well, that doesn't ever work in the favor of the person. Now, if the doctor says the individual has X diagnosis and talks about the limitations, such as, fatigue to the extent that they need, and I'm giving you an example, need to take naps 2 to 3 times a day, difficulty concentrating, um, blurred vision to the point where, and they actually describe in detail how the condition actually beyond the diagnosis impacts that person individually. That's when the condition, I call it, gives it life, to where then Social Security has the ability to understand. Now, if you really want to dig down and understand the kind of wording that Social Security looks for, they actually created a book which is called the Blue Book, like the color blue. And you go to SSA.gov, which is the easiest way to get into their website, and you type in their search book, Blue Book. And when you go to the Blue Book, there is the definition of disability for adults and children. You go to adults, and you literally see the different diagnoses, and then they specifically list out how a condition has to manifest itself, my word, to qualify as an automatic qualifier. And that's where the greatest level of clarity comes in. That book was created for doctors, for medical and or psychological providers to understand what Social Security is going to be looking for when they review a medical and or psychological record. And I've yet to come across a provider that know that book exists, but it was written for them. So often I will introduce a provider to it, or I will take a doctor's record, utilize it, create a doctor letter of support utilizing Social Security's Blue Book listing level of impairment, and ask if they would sign off on it and give them the
So you actually
URL.
draft up the letter for the doctor to basically,
Correct. So that,
wow,
and then I give them the URL so they can see
impressive.
where I get the wording from. So then they're actually using Social Security's wording.
Well, I think we should probably, I'm thinking that for question two, we should probably almost step back a little bit here. So I'm going to use the acronym SSI and SSDI for the.
Okay.
So what is the difference between
Okay.
SSDI benefits and SSDI benefits? Clearly,
SSI and SSDI.
correct.
Okay. So be aware whenever you walk into the world of Social Security, I tell people it's like walking to a dysfunctional family.
You're not going to get an argument from me on that
Yeah,
one. I can.
it makes zero common sense. The way that you function is you understand the language. So whenever you walk into a household, if you don't speak their language, you're never going to know what's going on. So one thing when it comes to Social Security, they love acronyms, and you will interact with them and they'll use acronyms. And then when you go into their website, you'll even find when they even describe their acronyms, they'll use different ways to say the same thing, which in my opinion is more confusing.
That's
So
criminally
they'll use,
misleading potentially, or not.
yeah, and what they'll do is they'll use the actual acronym, and then they'll start using terminology that's not connected to the acronym, which they believe is a common person way. And I'm like, just be consistent. So be aware that from that point it can be confusing. So be ready to enter and have the learning curve of learning their wording. So with that being said, let's go ahead and define SSI.
Maybe you could just
SSI,
remind everybody what SSI stands for too.
that's where I'm headed. SSI stands for Supplemental Security Income. Supplemental Security
And I
Income.
was calling it Social Security. Well,
That, and
the
people
road to
do
hell
that
is paved
all
with
the
good
time.
intentions.
It is not Social Security income, it's supplemental security income. And part of the reason why it's imperative that you use the correct name is that in the name, it explains what the program is. It's a supplementing program. Therefore, in addition, because it supplements to meeting that definition of disability we went into, you have to meet the criteria to qualify for the supplement, and it's a needs-based program, another term. And needs-based means that you have the limitations that they have when they created the program in the 60s of up to $2,000 in the bank, believe it or not. Back then, you could buy a Toyota Corolla for that, and that was enough for a down payment on a house, but they haven't changed the law. You can have one house of any value, and you can have a car of any value. There used to be a limitation of the value of the car, but they finally changed that. So a house of any value, a car of any value, one house, one car. Okay, up to $2,000. If you're a couple, you can have a whopping $3,000.
And that's
Uh,
liquid. That's like in a checking account or bank account.
Correct. Checking and or savings, any money that you can have access to. That also includes if you have these little fancy accounts like an UPMA account.
Yes.
People will come to me and say, I have nothing. We start an application and they say, oh, I forgot to tell you, grandma opened up an UPMA account for me. I'm like, okay, well, you're more than $2,000. We've got a problem. We've got to deal with it. And if an individual has more than $2,000, there are ways you can do what is called a spend down. And a spend down is a way that you utilize a resource for the benefit of the individual with a disability, because you cannot give away a resource to qualify for a needs-based program. Because if you do, you make yourself ineligible for 3 years.
So
So my,
I got a question on that one.
uh-huh,
So let's suppose that we have a scenario where at a very young age, you recognize that your loved one, your child, your grandchild, whatever the case may be, has this disability. And you understand the rules regarding one car, one house, and the fact that you got to have very low levels of liquid assets. Like you mentioned, $2,000 per individual. So
okay,
for a family realizing and recognizing that, is it a wise strategy to implement something called a special needs trust
yes,
to put any liquid assets intended for that individual inside of that special needs trust so that they don't have arm's length access to that money? Is that I'm familiar with that strategy, and just listening to you share, I usually hear from it from the estate planner's perspective, right? So sitting here with you today, I couldn't help but just think uh, that's one approach that you can take for larger long-term savings approaches. So it isn't like the individual is completely limited. There are ways to follow the rules and still allow for the individual to have liquid assets there to support them when it's needed.
right. And so having a special needs trust is one way. Another way that is relatively new, and when I say new, that's less than 15 years, is ABLE account,
That's where I was
ABLE.
going next. We're reading each
Yeah,
other's minds.
a a special needs trust is very, very beneficial.
And
And
the Able
oftentimes,
account has a bit of a cap on. I think the max you can put in an Able account is
right.
about
So
$100,000, I believe.
the special needs trust, I tell people you really need to have significant amounts of money
Right.
to really look into it to make it
Hmm.
worth a while. And so you need to speak to a special needs trust attorney to find out the value or when there's enough resources to make it of worthwhile. Where an ABLE account, Right now, this calendar year of 2025, you can deposit up to $19,000 in this calendar year, and you can have a grand total and build up in the account of up to
Right.
$100,000.
That was my understanding.
Yeah, and there are exceptions too. If the individual does work activity, there are other amounts that you can add up to. I don't have it memorized of additional amounts of work earnings that can be set up as a part of the able that are in addition to the 100,000. So you can be creative. The more you know, the more you can be creative in being able to set up things for the individual.
So that's in relation to the SSI, which again is
Supplemental security income. So what we're talking about is a supplementing program that has the limitations of $2,000 in the bank, one house, one car. Now, we haven't even talked about what it provides. The benefit provides a benefit and it supplements up to. So, what that means, if you're entitled to anything else from any other source, it's going to require that pay you first and it'll supplement nationally. The federal benefit is $967 for 2025. And as an example, different states will give an additional supplement. In California, they add and bring the supplement up to $1,206.94. So every state is different. California is one of the highest state supplementers. So it supplements a little bit over $300 to bring people up to 1206.94. The benefit in getting into the SSI program is that you have established that this individual over the age of 18 has a disability. They're on the program, and as they continue, regardless of what life events are occurring, you've got a good, clear, established onset of disability, and that's the SSI program. Now, the definition of disability we talked about is not permanent. They do what's called a diary date so that you know whatever program you're entitled to. Every 1 to 8 years, they do medical reviews. And that's why it's essential that the medical record, I tell my clients every 6 month minimally that the medical and or psychological record have the clarity of what's going on. So there's not an issue of your medical record not continuing to tell your truth.
so it's a recurring, you're saying is it one, it could be every other year or every year, or it could be one, like you mentioned, 1 to 8 years. So
They
is
they
it arbitrary
establish
to the point where they could be doing a medical review every year, or could it be anywhere from 1 to 8 years?
It can be anywhere from 1 to 8 years. They establish what's called a diary date.
Okay. All right. So that's so again, this is with SSDI you're referring to, or is that still
Both.
okay? So what is the main difference again between SSI and SSDI? Is
Okay, I
the
haven't even gone into SSDI yet. So now I'm going to go into SSDI and you'll see that it's like twins. They look alike, they sound alike, they're in the same family, but they're fundamentally different. Okay, so the SSDI is Social Security disability insurance. That's a disability insurance program that's based on FICA contributions. So your paycheck, your FICA contributions go into the system, and the FICA contributions typically allow an individual at retirement age to access a benefit. But there is a provision that allows a person to access it early because of disability. If you meet that definition of disability I've described, and you've paid into the system 5 of the last 10 years, you're allowed to access a benefit based on your contributions. Now, a disabled adult child can get a benefit based on a parent's contributions. And that's another way an individual can get benefits under the SSDI program that may not have a work history. That's a special way that you get SSDI based on mom or dad's contributions. And I'm going to give you the special way that that's done, and that has its own
That's
set
actually a
of rules.
segue into our third question too, by the way. So
Oh, okay. Well, I'm just traveling down the road.
we're heading in the right direction.
Okay, so the way an individual qualifies based on a parent is called the Disabled Adult Child Program. And in classic Social Security style, they love to change the names. And the new name for the program that nobody uses, so in case you see material written about it, it's also known as Childhood Disabled Beneficiary. That's the new name for the program, but nobody uses it. But the current or the previous name is Disabled Adult Child, DAC. Everybody uses that acronym, and that's the most commonly known. So a person to be DAC eligible has to have a parent that is an eligible parent. That means mom or dad is either retired or disabled or deceased. So when they have a parent who's retired or disabled or deceased, and the child, okay, has a disability that is between the ages of 18 and prior to 22. And this is the tricky part of it. You have to either, and the rules positively changed last year, you either have to have been awarded SSI benefits between 18 and prior to 22, or you have to have records that support a start of disability between 18 to 22. And if you've done work activity, that work activity cannot have been above the term of art is called substantial gainful activity, which is a dollar amount of this calendar
Is that
year,
on a state by state? That
1,000.
dollar amount is it a state by state number, an amount,
No, it's a
Daniel?
national dollar. It's a national dollar amount of $1,620. That is national, except
Is
for
that on a monthly
Hawaii.
basis? Or
Correct. Gross monthly income.
so if your income is under, what'd you say, was 1,600 and
It's $1,620 for the contiguous
got it.
United States, not including Hawaii and Alaska. And that is for this calendar year. So if an individual starts earning substantial gainful activity in any calendar year after the age of 18, they lose the ability to access benefits based on a parent's record when mom or dad retires, become disabled, or they die.
All right. So you say parents. I'm assuming this applies to step parents or and adoptive parents as well. It's not to be.
Correct. Correct.
All right. Okay. So
And
that basically Daniel, you managed to go through. And I'm not surprised because you are a savant when it comes to this information. You managed to answer questions 2 and 3 for me almost together. The third question was how could you qualify? How could someone qualify under their parents? So you managed to get through both. So that's awesome. I do have one more question though before we wrap up here, and
okay.
I'm really to talk more about your company. You know, and it's really about before someone considers benefit coaching, what are some of the important considerations that they should bear in mind? Like what should they be thinking about before coming to you and asking for help? Because
It
this is one of the most complex areas within the United States. I'm from Canada originally, and I moved down here 12 years ago, and there's no doubt in my mind that the all the different programs with Medicare, Social Security, incredibly complex relative to what we have up in Canada. So I think it would be really helpful if you could just sort of give us some thoughts on what people should be thinking about before taking an opportunity to work with you guys.
yeah, it's really important that people get a sense of what are your goals? What are you wanting to accomplish? What are your current and future goals? Just the way you would do with financial planning. And
Right.
then understand how these benefits are going to work in your favor. Do you want as an example, let's say, your son Johnny, wants to be able to do as much work as they possibly can, and you don't want to discourage them because I don't believe in creating a welfare box, is
Right.
what I nickname it.
You and I agree.
So Johnny has a developmental disability, and with special accommodations, has found a way to do some work activity. So we don't want to discourage that necessarily. But what I just described is somebody with a disability, but with accommodations is able to do the work. With those accommodations, if those accommodations are captured, okay, and formalized, the value of that work activity can have less of a negative impact for Johnny in the future if you want Johnny to be able to access benefits based on you. Now, some individuals find a way in the universe with a disability to fly. They do. And we don't want to discourage it. They find a way to be able to fly, to excel, and they don't need these benefits. Other people don't. And some people need to be able to have these benefits as a safety net. That's what you need to look at and understand. What's going on with your child? What's going on with your family? Understand the dynamic of what is realistic, as opposed to oftentimes people say, I'm going to dream big, and that's where no, dream realistically. What is true? What is possible? You can have a big dream, but have a safety net so that you're aware that what you're accomplishing is not going to take away things that you may want in the future. I have a family, who came to me with the most amazing records at age 14, but the child turned 18 and they didn't have any records. And now the child's 30 years old, and the child had a temporary job and wind up making more than SGA. And it's like they completely did everything in a counterproductive way, so that the child, now that mom is retiring, is really going to have a hard time getting benefits based on the parent's record. It's
Which
going
means
to
the
take
parents
some
are going to
hard
have to
work.
come up with the shortfall, most likely.
Yeah.
So we're
So
going
it,
to have
it's,
not a
it's
great
un,
not a great retirement planning strategy either.
Exactly, because you're looking at what is your strategy. I'm going to retire at X age. How's my child going to deal with this? Is my child able to fly solo? Is my child going to need to be able to be dependent on this? If they are, I'm going to monitor and make sure that the activity they do did not negatively impact them. I'm not saying put them in a welfare box. I'm
Yes.
not saying don't have dreams. I'm not saying don't have goals. I'm saying make sure that you align them. And when you begin to look at it, understand what's important to you, what's important to your child, and what's real. What's real.
Mhm. Well, you've led me to another follow-up question. I'm going to go back to what you talked about earlier when we first started the podcast, and that was the fact that you are also working, I think you said a total of 14 states, I believe. Um, if a candidate came to you in a state in a one of the states that you're currently not licensed or not specialized in, is the is the uh, is the process for becoming eligible in that state to the extent that you could become I don't know, registered and work with that client, or is the 14 that you have currently the basically the cap?
Okay. First of all, you don't have to be registered in individual states.
Okay.
Okay. Secondly, it takes me about an hour to find the nuances in the different states, an hour to two
So if I
hours.
came to you with a client that was not in one of the states that you're currently covered in, it wouldn't be onerous for you to become
No, it would not be, because most of what I work in is national. The state specific stuff, the state specific stuff are things like the Medicaid in the state. And then if the state has a state disability short-term system. Now,
Great.
I don't delve down into what do you call them? County things like food stamps or
Got it. Understood.
Section 8, or that's not my area of expertise. That's not a good use of my skill
I
set.
appreciate that. So I do have a couple states I wanted to ask you if you have access to already, and that is Ohio and Texas.
Yep.
Perfect.
Yeah, those I've worked in Ohio and Texas.
That's great because I probably have people in both states I could introduce you to already. So that would be great. So we've included your information, so this is going on video and audio. People can watch on the Three Questions website. We're also available on Apple and Spotify. So for the folks who are watching, they're seeing your contact information on the screen below your name. But for those who are listening on Apple or on Spotify, could you share what is the best way for them to reach out to you directly? How can they
Yeah,
contact you?
the we're Benefits Education Center. The website is the easiest way to get there is www.benefits, that is plural, E as in education, C as in center.com. The phone number to contact, because I do a free initial consult for up to a half hour for people that want to, I sometimes have done that for individuals and then they fly solo. I don't have a problem with that.
Right.
562-881-6199,
Perfect.
562-881-6199. And I literally have had people that have followed me online and literally have done my classes and have utilized them. And I don't have a problem with this because I'm all about people finding the best way to succeed. I'm all about communities succeeding, but I'm not a nonprofit.
Well, and I really value the service that you provide. And I also really appreciate the fact that you were able to make time for us again. Daniel Fortuno, thank you so much.
You're very welcome. It's my pleasure. And thank you for having me.
Daniel Fortuno is the president and CEO of Benefits Education Center. Thank you, Daniel.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
I look forward to bringing you the Three Questions podcast, and I hope you find them educational and informative. Please consider liking this video and subscribing to our YouTube and podcast channels. And to receive notification of when our latest episode has been posted, please click on the notifications bell. Last but not least, to schedule an online Zoom consultation with me to discuss your wealth management needs, please click on the link in the description box below, www.onecapital.com/meet with Wayne. Thank you, and we will see you soon.